In the vast and distant reaches of the galaxy, the Galactic Empire ruled over countless worlds, each with its own traditions and customs. Among these was the mighty alien kingdom of Azar, a civilization proud of its strength and honor. The Azarians were known for their warrior spirit and fierce loyalty to their people. But the Empire's High Council had decided that one of their most respected leaders, Princess Kara, had crossed a line that even her great strength could not protect her from. Princess Kara was fierce, proud, and powerful. She had earned her place as one of the most skilled warriors in the galaxy, respected and feared by all who met her. But a mistake on her part, an action taken in anger, had turned the tides. A battle she fought had gone against the will of the council, and now the princess was to face punishment. However, this punishment would not come in the form of exile or death, as many expected. Instead, Kara was sentenced to something far worse, something that would strip her of her dignity and force her into a life of disgrace. She was ordered to marry a human, a species that the Azarians viewed with disdain. The punishment was not only a sentence for Kara's past actions, but it was also meant to humiliate her, make her live among those she considered inferior. The human in question was a man from Earth, a small planet located at the far edge of the galaxy. His name was Eric, and he was far from what Kara had imagined. She had expected the human to be weak, cowardly, and beneath her in every way. But the reality was different. When the Royal Council made the announcement, they spoke of Eric with an air of casual indifference, as though he were just another pawn in a galactic game. They claimed he was a low-ranking officer, an ordinary man who would never have imagined such an honor, or, rather, such a burden. As Kara was led into the grand hall where the ceremony was to take place, her thoughts were a storm of anger. How had she been brought to this? How had her fate become so entwined with the humans? She had fought so hard for everything she had. The strength, the respect, the title, but now it all seemed meaningless. Her eyes swept across the assembly of Azarians gathered to witness the event. They watched with cold, judgmental eyes, awaiting her acceptance of this cruel punishment. The grand hall echoed with silence as Kara was escorted to the center. She stood tall, her back straight, and her jaw set in defiance. She refused to show any weakness, even as the weight of her humiliation pressed down on her. This wasn't just about marriage. It was a public execution of her honor. She had been forced into this situation by the very people who once celebrated her victories. The doors at the far end of the hall opened slowly, and Eric stepped forward. He was taller than she had imagined, though still nowhere near her height. His features were simple, and he had a certain ruggedness to him, but nothing about him screamed power or royalty. He seemed like an ordinary man, dressed in the humble uniform of his species, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. His gaze was calm and steady, yet there was an underlying strength to him that she couldn't ignore. Eric's steps were slow and deliberate, his movements betraying no fear. The moment his eyes met hers, Kara felt a strange twist in her chest, a sensation she quickly dismissed as nothing more than her pride trying to fight back. She would not be affected by this man. She could not. As the ceremony began, the words of the officiant filled the air, but Kara didn't hear them. Her mind was elsewhere, consumed by the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that had taken hold of her. This was not the way she had envisioned her life, nor was it the future she had fought for. She had always believed she was destined for greatness, but now her world had crumbled around her. When the moment came for her to pledge her vows, her voice was cold and unwavering. She spoke the words not because she believed in them, but because she had no choice. The act of marriage meant nothing to her. It was a mere formality. She had no interest in the man who stood beside her, and she would not let him have any power over her. But when Eric's hand brushed against hers, a strange heat spread through her. She felt the warmth of his touch and the weight of his presence beside her. It was unexpected. The touch was simple, but for a brief moment, she felt something stir deep inside her, something she couldn't explain. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a vulnerability she wasn't sure she wanted to acknowledge. She quickly pulled her hand away, forcing her thoughts back into line. Eric, for his part, seemed unaware of her inner turmoil. He stood beside her with quiet resolve, his expression calm, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, a flicker of something deeper that she couldn't place. He had no idea the storm that was raging inside her. The ceremony ended, and the hall erupted in polite applause. But Kara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that brief moment when their hands had touched. She knew she couldn't let this new sensation distract her, but deep down, she feared it already had. As she left the hall with Eric by her side, Kara couldn't help but wonder what awaited her now. Was this really her punishment, or had she just stepped into something far more complicated than she could ever have imagined? The days that followed the ceremony felt like a blur to Princess Kara. She was still reeling from the events of that day, her mind unable to process the reality of what had just happened. She had been forced into marriage with a human, something that should have never occurred in the grand halls of Azar. It felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of everything she had fought for. Her new husband, Eric, was everything she had expected him to be: ordinary. His clothes were simple, a dull uniform that didn't compare to the fine armor of the Azarian warriors. His manner was calm, polite, and somewhat distant, but there was a strength to him, a quiet confidence that Kara couldn't ignore, even as she tried. She had expected him to be weak, to show some sign of fear or uncertainty, but there was none of that in him. They were assigned separate quarters for the first few nights, with no real expectation of a traditional marriage. The council had been clear. This union was a punishment, a way to disgrace her. There was no need for any romantic gestures or shared affection. But every time Kara tried to ignore Eric, she found herself thinking about him. One evening, as Kara sat alone in her room, her mind wandered to the events of the ceremony. Eric had not said much during their vows, but his eyes had been different. They weren't full of judgment or pity, like most of the Azarians. They were calm, steady, and full of something else, something she couldn't quite place. She had spent hours trying to convince herself that it meant nothing, that he was just another man, and she had no reason to care about him. But it didn't work. She couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted between them, something that went beyond the boundaries of the marriage they had just entered. The next morning, Eric arrived at her chambers with a tray of food. It was simple, yet thoughtful. She hadn't asked for anything, but he had brought it anyway. As he set it down in front of her, Kara glanced at him. He met her gaze without hesitation, his eyes warm and open. "I thought you might be hungry," Eric said softly. "It's not much, but I've heard you like this dish." Kara raised an eyebrow, surprised by his knowledge of her preferences. "How do you know what I like?" she asked, her voice cold, trying to mask the curiosity that bubbled up inside her. "I've been told a few things," he replied, his tone light. "It wasn't hard to learn. I made sure to ask around." Kara's heart fluttered slightly. She didn't know why it bothered her. Perhaps it was the thought of him taking time to learn about her, to care enough to bring her something she liked. It made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't understand. But she refused to let him see that. She picked up a piece of bread, biting into it without a word. The taste was familiar, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax, her guard down just enough for the simplest of comforts. Eric, noticing her change in demeanor, didn't speak. He sat at the edge of the room, waiting quietly. Kara glanced at him, noticing how he never made a move to sit next to her or intrude on her space. He was giving her space, something she hadn't expected. Most people, especially those who had been assigned to her, would try to get close, to gain favor with her. But Eric seemed different. He didn't push for anything. He didn't try to make the marriage feel real, or to pretend that it was anything other than what it was. "Thank you," Kara muttered, her voice low. It was a simple thing, but it felt strange coming from her. She had never thanked anyone for anything, but there was something about this man, this human, that made her feel strange. Eric gave her a small smile, the kind that was warm but still guarded. He didn't respond with any grand gestures or words. Instead, he simply nodded. It was then that Kara realized how little she knew about him. She had been so focused on her own anger and humiliation that she hadn't even bothered to ask who he was. She looked at him again, trying to find some hint of weakness, some sign that he wasn't as strong as he appeared, but there was nothing. His calmness was unsettling. It was as if he was perfectly at peace with everything, with the marriage, with the situation, as if he had already accepted his fate, and perhaps hers as well. "How did you end up here?" Kara asked suddenly, unable to keep the question in. Eric looked up, his expression unreadable. "I was a soldier," he said quietly. "A simple one, not much more than that. I served in the Earth military, did my part. But when they called for people to volunteer for the exchange program, well, I thought it was my chance to make a difference. I never expected this." Kara didn't know why, but she found herself intrigued by his story. He spoke without bitterness, without regret. It was as if he accepted his role in all this, as if he had no problem being here with her. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. "Is this what you wanted?" Kara asked, her voice quieter than before. "To be here with me." Eric's eyes softened slightly. "It's not about what I wanted," he replied. "It's about what I'm here to do. I may not understand it fully, but I believe everything happens for a reason. And if I'm here, then I'll do my best to make things right." Kara was taken aback by his sincerity. It wasn't something she was used to. Most people who were brought into her life, especially those in her service, were only out for their own gain, but Eric wasn't like that. He wasn't trying to impress her or win her over. He simply existed beside her, content in his role, whatever it may be. For the first time since their meeting, Kara felt a flicker of doubt about everything she had assumed. She had expected to hate him, to resent him for his part in her punishment. But now, in the quiet of the room, with no one else around, she found herself questioning everything she had believed about him. As the day went on, she couldn't shake the thought of Eric's calm demeanor and quiet strength. She had been prepared to push him away, to make him feel small and insignificant, but he hadn't given her the chance, and somehow that only made him seem even more mysterious. Days turned into weeks, and still Princess Kara found herself struggling with the reality of her situation. The anger that had filled her on the day of the wedding had slowly begun to fade, but it was replaced with something far more troubling. It was a feeling she couldn't quite place, a mix of curiosity and confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel anything for Eric, the human who had been forced into her life. But there it was, his presence lingering in her thoughts more often than she would have liked. She had tried to keep her distance. After all, their union was merely a formality. He was nothing more than the punishment her people had decided upon. But there was something about him, something different that kept her from pushing him away completely. He wasn't the weak, fearful man she had expected. There was a quiet strength in him, something that made her hesitate every time she tried to dismiss him. One evening, after a long day of formal duties, Kara found herself in the palace gardens, standing alone among the blooming flowers that surrounded her. It was rare for her to seek solitude, but tonight, the weight of her emotions felt too heavy to ignore. She needed a moment to clear her mind, to focus on something other than the strange, unsettling feelings that Eric had stirred in her. As she walked through the peaceful garden, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Eric had always been quiet, his presence subtle. He was never far from her side, whether she liked it or not. It had become a strange part of their routine. He wasn't demanding her attention, but somehow he was always there when she needed him, whether she wanted it or not. "Do you mind if I join you?" Eric's voice was calm, respectful. It was as if he had learned the delicate balance of not intruding upon her space, but still offering his presence when she seemed lost in thought. Kara didn't answer right away. She had come here to be alone, to think, but something about his question made her pause. Without looking at him, she nodded slowly. "You may," she replied quietly. Eric stepped beside her, keeping a respectful distance. They walked in silence for a while. The only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves in the evening breeze. Kara couldn't help but feel a strange discomfort in the air between them, a quiet tension that neither of them seemed willing to address. She wasn't sure what to say, and he didn't press her for conversation. It was as if he understood her need for silence, for space. After a few minutes, Eric broke the silence in his usual, soft-spoken way. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady and unbothered by the quiet around them. "This is hard, isn't it? For both of us." Kara turned to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She had expected him to speak about something trivial, but instead, his words surprised her. "You think I'm finding this hard?" she asked, her tone defensive, though she didn't quite know why. Eric didn't flinch. He met her gaze calmly, his expression open, without fear or judgment. "I think it's hard for anyone to be forced into something they didn't choose," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I understand that. I know you didn't want this marriage, and neither did I. But here we are. And we can either make the best of it or keep fighting it." Kara was stunned into silence. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. It wasn't just his words, but the way he said them. So calmly, so without judgment. It was as if he wasn't just speaking to her as a royal or a warrior, but as someone who understood the weight of what she was going through. It made her uncomfortable, but at the same time, she felt something stir deep inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She quickly pushed the thought away. She couldn't allow herself to be affected by him. She had to remain strong, focused on the task at hand. "You don't understand," she said sharply, more to convince herself than him. "This is not a choice. I've been dishonored. You've been brought here for the same reason. There is no making the best of it." Eric's gaze softened, but he didn't argue with her. Instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging her words. "I understand that," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we can't find some peace, even in a situation like this. Sometimes, the best we can do is be kind to each other, even when everything around us is difficult." Kara stopped walking and turned to face him, a frown forming on her face. She couldn't understand why he kept speaking this way. It was as if he was offering something that she couldn't quite grasp. "Why do you keep saying things like that?" she asked, her voice more confused than angry. Eric met her gaze, his expression earnest. "Because, Kara, we're both human beings. No matter what the council wants us to be, no matter how they want to shape us, we're still people. I'm here because I want to make the best of it, even if it's difficult. I don't expect anything from you, but I can at least offer you my respect." Kara felt a strange stirring in her chest. She wanted to be angry, to tell him that his words meant nothing, but she couldn't. Something in his sincerity made it impossible to push him away completely. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to control every situation. But with Eric, she felt her defenses weakening. She had never met anyone like him before. So calm, so accepting, so kind. "I don't need your pity," she said quickly, her voice shaking slightly with emotion she couldn't control. "I don't want anyone's pity." Eric didn't react to her words, but instead, he simply gave her a small, understanding smile. "I'm not offering pity, Kara," he said gently. "I'm offering friendship, if you're willing to accept it." Kara stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into the cold armor of her pride, but something in her stopped her. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of something else. A new feeling that made her heart race in an unfamiliar way. But she refused to acknowledge it, not yet. "Friendship," she repeated, her voice quiet. "You're asking for that?" Eric nodded, his smile still warm. Yes, if you'll let me. Kara's mind was a whirlwind. She wanted to refuse, to push him away. But the truth was, part of her wanted to accept. Just for a moment, just to see what it would be like. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She was the princess. She was strong. She couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice distant. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Eric standing alone in the quiet garden. But something had changed in her. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she knew it was there, lingering in the back of her mind. The days that followed felt different to Princess Kara. It wasn't that anything had changed on the outside. The palace walls were still as cold and intimidating as ever. The grand halls were still filled with whispers of her disgrace, and the pressure from the council to remain rigid and unaffected weighed on her shoulders. But something had shifted within her, something she couldn't explain or ignore. It had all started when Eric had offered his hand. In friendship, she had tried to push it away, to reject the very idea. She wasn't like other women who depended on people for comfort, who sought out companionship in moments of weakness. She had always been strong, stronger than anyone she knew. But Eric's calm presence had quietly broken through the walls she had built around herself. In the quiet moments when no one was around, Kara found herself thinking about him. She would replay their conversation over and over in her mind. His words, simple yet profound, echoed in her thoughts. "We're both human beings." How had he said that so easily? How had he managed to make her feel something she hadn't felt in years, something she couldn't quite define? Kara had never felt vulnerable before. Vulnerability was a weakness, something to be avoided at all costs. Yet the more she tried to fight it, the more she found herself drawn to Eric. It wasn't like the others, other men or warriors who only sought power or status. There was something in Eric's eyes, something genuine that made her wonder if perhaps he was more than just the punishment she had been sentenced to. One evening, as the stars above the palace twinkled in the night sky, Kara found herself on the balcony, looking out into the vast expanse of the galaxy. It had been a long day, filled with reports and endless duties that kept her distracted. But now, as she stood in the silence of the night, a strange feeling settled over her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was unlike anything she had felt before. She had come here to clear her mind, to focus on something other than the confusion that had been swirling inside her for days. But her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Eric, his presence, his quiet strength, the way he had treated her like a person rather than a symbol of punishment. She could still feel the faint warmth of his hand when it brushed against hers, that simple touch that had sent ripples through her heart. "Why am I thinking about him?" she whispered to herself, her voice carrying only in the silence of the night. Just as the words left her lips, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Eric. His presence was quiet, yet it had become familiar in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't speak immediately, but Kara could sense his eyes on her. His gaze was steady, calm, but there was something more there, something she had never expected from him. "Princess," Eric said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a question that he didn't need to ask aloud. Kara didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure what to say. Her thoughts were a storm of conflicting emotions, and she had never been good at showing her feelings. She turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, the space filled with words unspoken. "I didn't expect to find you out here," Eric said, his tone gentle. "Are you all right?" Kara hesitated. She had never been one to admit when something bothered her. She had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to handle anything that came her way. But tonight, something felt different. Something in her heart stirred, and for the first time, she found herself wanting to open up to him, if only for a moment. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice low. She wasn't looking at him now, but at the stars that stretched out above them. "I don't understand what's happening to me. I've been trained to ignore weakness, to never show any vulnerability. And yet, I can't seem to stop thinking about everything. About you." Eric didn't move. He simply stood there, watching her with an expression that was full of understanding, without judgment. "I don't think you're weak, Kara," he said softly. "We all have moments where we feel uncertain. It's not about weakness, it's about being human." The words hung in the air between them, and Kara could feel her chest tighten. His words were simple, but they were like a balm to her troubled heart. He had said it again. Human. A reminder that despite the differences in their species, despite the power that she wielded and the punishment she had been sentenced to, they were both just people at the end of the day. "I don't know how to deal with this," Kara said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know how to deal with you." She turned to look at him now, her eyes filled with confusion and something else, something deeper. Eric met her gaze without hesitation. There was no fear, no judgment, only understanding. "I don't expect anything from you, Kara. I'm not here to make you feel something you're not ready for, but I do want you to know that you don't have to carry this alone. Whatever it is you're feeling, you don't have to bury it." Kara felt a tightness in her throat, a sensation she had never allowed herself to experience. For the first time, she felt the walls around her begin to crack. She had spent so much of her life building those walls, protecting herself from anything that might make her feel vulnerable. But now, in front of this human, she felt like she was being torn apart, broken open in a way that made her terrified. "I don't know if I can trust this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything I've known has taught me to be strong, to never show weakness. But with you..." She stopped, unsure of how to continue. Eric took a step closer, his presence still gentle, still calm. "You don't have to do this on your own, Kara. We're both here in this together. And whatever happens, I'll be here. No expectations, no pressure." Kara felt the weight of his words settle over her. For the first time in days, the storm inside her quieted. She didn't know what the future held, or how she would navigate this unexpected connection with Eric. But for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she had spent so long avoiding. And for once, she didn't feel the need to hide from it. The days that followed their conversation in the garden were strange for Princess Kara. She found herself caught between two opposing forces, her pride and her growing curiosity about Eric, the human she had been forced to marry. Every time she tried to push him away, she found herself pulled back, not by his actions, but by the way he made her feel. It was frustrating. She didn't want to be vulnerable, but it seemed impossible to ignore the growing connection between them. Her duties as princess kept her busy, as always. She spent her days overseeing military reports, attending to the council's requests, and ensuring the empire's strength remained intact. But in the quiet moments, when there was no one else around, her thoughts often drifted back to him. Eric, the man she had once seen as nothing more than a tool for her punishment. It had started with his kindness, then his quiet patience, but now it was more than that. She found herself noticing small things about him: his laugh, the way his eyes brightened when he talked about Earth, the warmth of his smile when he didn't think she was looking. All of it was starting to chip away at the walls she had carefully built around her heart. One afternoon, as Kara walked through the palace's grand halls, she was startled to see Eric standing at the far end, waiting by the door to her chambers. His expression was calm, but there was something different about him today. He wasn't just the quiet man she had married. There was a sense of purpose in his stance, a quiet confidence that made her pause. "You're here again," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Eric turned to her, offering her a small smile. "I thought we might talk," he said simply. "I know things haven't been easy for either of us." Kara felt the familiar resistance rise in her chest. She had been trying to keep her distance, to remind herself that this marriage was not about connection. But when she saw the genuine concern in his eyes, something inside her shifted. "I've been busy," she replied, trying to remain distant. "There's not much time for conversation." Eric nodded, understanding. "I get it. But I wanted to say something. He paused, as if considering his next words carefully. I'm not expecting you to change, Kara. I just want you to know that I'm here. I don't want anything from you. But if there's ever a moment you need someone to talk to, I'm not going anywhere. Kara's heart fluttered at his words. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly, so honestly. For a moment, she stood there, unsure of how to respond. She had spent so long shutting people out, convinced that they would only disappoint her, but here was a man who had nothing to gain from being kind to her. He wasn't doing this for status or power. He was simply offering her something she had never asked for: understanding. I don't need your pity, she said quickly, but it sounded weaker than she intended. She hadn't meant to sound defensive, but the words slipped out before she could stop them. Eric didn't flinch. He simply nodded again, his expression patient. I'm not offering pity, Kara. I'm offering respect. It's not the same thing. She wasn't sure why, but his words felt different than anything she had heard before. It wasn't just because he was speaking to her with such care. It was the way he understood her, without judgment. It made her feel seen in a way that no one ever had. She crossed her arms, still unsure how to feel. I don't know what you want from me, she said, her voice low. You say you're not expecting anything, but I don't believe you. I don't expect anything, Eric repeated gently. But I'm not going anywhere. I can't change what's happened, Kara, but we can still decide how we deal with it. I'm here because I want to be here, not because I have to be. Kara looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She had been so caught up in her own anger, in her sense of betrayal, that she hadn't taken the time to see him as a person. He wasn't just the human she had been forced to marry. He was someone who had been thrust into a difficult situation, just like her. And yet, despite everything, he didn't seem angry. He didn't seem resentful. He just was. Her mind raced, and for the first time in days, she let herself wonder what it would be like to have him in her life in a different way. It was a dangerous thought. She had spent so long building walls around her heart to protect herself from the pain of disappointment. But here he was, offering her something she had never expected. A chance to trust again. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted, her voice soft. But maybe I'll try. Eric smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. That's all I ask. For the rest of the afternoon, Kara couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had changed. It wasn't just that she was beginning to see Eric differently. It was that she was beginning to see herself differently too. For the first time, she allowed herself to question the things she had always believed about herself. Could she trust someone again? Could she let go of the walls she had built around her heart? She wasn't sure, but something about Eric's steady presence made her think that maybe, just maybe, she could. Later that evening, as Kara prepared for bed, she found herself glancing at the space next to her, where Eric now slept. She had always assumed that their marriage would be nothing more than a hollow formality. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, it could be something else. A change had begun. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. Princess Kara woke up early, the soft light of the morning filtering through the curtains of her chamber. For a moment, she simply lay there, staring up at the ceiling, letting the quiet of the room calm her racing thoughts. The events of the past few weeks had left her unsettled, unsure of what to make of the strange feelings that had been building inside her. The marriage she had once seen as a punishment had begun to feel like something entirely different, something far more complicated. She had tried to ignore it, to focus on her duties as princess, but it was impossible to push aside the way Eric made her feel. Every time he spoke, every time they shared a moment, something inside her stirred, a feeling she couldn't quite explain, and one that she was reluctant to admit even to herself. The walls she had spent years building around her heart had begun to crack. She had told herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could stand alone. But Eric wasn't like anyone she had ever known. He didn't push her, didn't try to change her. He simply offered her understanding, something she hadn't allowed herself to accept for a long time. And with that understanding, he had managed to awaken something in her, something soft, something vulnerable. As Kara sat up and began to dress for the day, she caught sight of the reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked different to her, as if they held a glimmer of something new. She had never been the type to focus on her emotions or allow herself to feel too deeply. But now, when she looked into her own eyes, she saw someone who was beginning to question everything she had once believed. There was a knock at the door, interrupting her thoughts. She straightened her clothes quickly, brushing her hair back from her face. "Enter," she called out, her voice steady. The door creaked open, and Eric stepped inside. As always, he was calm, composed, and a little distant, but there was something different about him today. His usual quiet smile was replaced with a more serious expression, one that Kara didn't recognize immediately. "I brought you breakfast," Eric said, holding up a tray with a simple meal of fruit and bread. "I thought you might appreciate it." Kara nodded, though she didn't reach for the tray right away. She was aware of how strange this situation had become. Here they were, two people bound by a marriage that neither of them had chosen. And yet, in moments like these, it almost felt like something more. They shared these small, quiet moments together, and in those moments, the weight of her royal duties, her pride, and her anger seemed to slip away. It was just them. "You didn't have to do this," Kara said, her voice quieter than she intended. She had meant it as a simple thank you, but the words carried a weight she hadn't expected. Eric didn't respond right away. He simply placed the tray on the table beside her and sat down, giving her space. "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted to. You don't have to be alone in this." Kara felt her chest tighten at his words. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself that she was strong enough to carry the burden by herself. But every time Eric spoke to her like this, it felt like he was offering her something she hadn't allowed herself to take, something simple and kind. "I'm not alone," she said quickly, forcing herself to sound confident. "I have my people. I have my kingdom." Eric's eyes didn't leave hers, his expression gentle. "But you don't have anyone here with you." "Not really. And I don't think that's what you want. You don't have to pretend that you're fine when you're not." Kara looked away, feeling the sting of his words. She didn't want to admit it, but he was right. She had spent so many years pushing people away, afraid of being hurt, afraid of showing weakness. And now, Eric was right in front of her, offering her something she didn't know how to accept: comfort, kindness, and a reminder that she didn't have to carry everything on her own. "You're right," Kara whispered, the admission coming out softer than she had planned. "I've spent so long pretending to be strong, but I don't know how to let go of that." Eric reached out, his hand hovering near hers before he placed it gently on the table beside her. "You don't have to let go of everything. You can still be strong, Kara, but you don't have to do it alone." Kara felt a strange flutter in her chest as she turned to face him. For a moment, she simply stared at him, unsure of what to say. His touch, so simple and calm, had awakened something inside her. She had never allowed herself to feel anything like this: vulnerable, uncertain, and yet strangely free. "I don't know how to trust anyone," Kara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything." "I don't expect you to trust me right away," Eric said gently. "But trust yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to take that first step. And I'll be here with you, whatever comes next." Kara's heart raced as she looked at him. There was sincerity in his voice, and for the first time, she realized that he wasn't just offering her empty words. He meant what he said, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for her to start believing that things didn't always have to be so hard. For the first time in days, Kara allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel the weight of the moment. She was still uncertain, still unsure of what the future held, but for now, she could let herself feel something other than anger and fear, She didn't know what would come of her marriage, of her connection with Eric. But she was starting to believe that it might not be as impossible as she once thought. "Thank you," Kara said, her voice soft, "for being here." Eric smiled, a small, genuine smile that made Kara's heart skip a beat. "You don't have to thank me, Kara. I'm not going anywhere." The days following their conversation in the garden felt different for Princess Kara. Something had changed inside her, and though she couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened, it was undeniable. The walls she had carefully built around her heart had begun to crack, and though she had tried to hold on to her pride and distance, it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the truth. Eric was still there, as calm and steady as ever. His presence no longer felt like a reminder of her punishment, but rather a quiet comfort, something she had not allowed herself to seek before. She had spent so long hiding from the world, from the pain of being forced into this marriage. But Eric had shown her a different way. He didn't push her, didn't demand anything from her. He simply was, and in his being, he offered her something she had never known before: peace. But peace was not something Kara was used to. She was the daughter of a proud and powerful empire. She had spent her entire life preparing for a future that was built on strength and duty. To feel this softness, this vulnerability, was foreign and uncomfortable. But she couldn't deny that it was also something she wanted. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, and the sky too earned a brilliant shade of purple, Kara found herself alone in the courtyard. She had come here to clear her mind, to sort through the tangled thoughts that had taken root in her heart. The soft breeze stirred the leaves around her, and for a moment she simply stood still, breathing in the cool air. She had never allowed herself to think of Eric as more than a punishment, a symbol of her disgrace. But now, with each passing day, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this than she had been willing to admit. He had been kind, patient, and respectful. He had never once tried to make her feel anything she wasn't ready to feel. But she was ready now. She was ready to admit that she was starting to care for him, even though the thought terrified her. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "Princess." Kara turned to find Eric standing at the edge of the courtyard, looking at her with the same calm expression he always wore. He didn't look at her with pity or with any expectation. He simply looked at her as if she were a person who mattered. "Eric," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. She hadn't called him by his name before, always using formal titles. But today, it felt right. She motioned for him to come closer. He stepped forward, his boots making soft sounds on the stone path. As he drew closer, Kara felt her heart race. She wasn't sure why, but the sight of him, the simple, steady man who had been placed into her life as punishment, made something inside her stir. "I wanted to talk to you," Eric said, his voice soft but firm. Kara looked at him, searching his face. "What is it?" Eric hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I know we've both been living in this strange space between what we were supposed to be and what we are now. But I've come to realize something." He paused, his eyes meeting hers with a seriousness that made Kara's chest tighten. "This marriage, it's not just about duty or punishment anymore. It's about us. It's about what we choose to make of it." Kara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't expect him to say that. She had spent so long thinking of this union as a burden, something she had to endure. But Eric was telling her that there was more to it. And for the first time, she considered the possibility that he might be right. "I'm not asking you to forget everything that's happened," Eric continued, his voice steady. "But I'm asking you to think about what you want now, what you need. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your love. But I do want to be here for you. I just need to know if you're willing to let me in." Kara swallowed hard, her thoughts spinning. She had never been the type to let people in. Her entire life had been focused on duty, on honor. She had never allowed herself to care for anyone in a way that could make her vulnerable. But now, with Eric standing before her, offering her something so simple, so genuine, She was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she was ready for a change. "I don't know how to let you in," Kara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to open myself up like that." Eric smiled gently, a soft, understanding smile. "You don't have to know everything right now. But if you're willing to try, then we can take it one step at a time. We don't have to rush anything. I'm here for as long as you need me." The sincerity in his words washed over her, and for the first time in a long time, Kara felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had been carrying the burden of pride and duty for so long, refusing to let anyone in, refusing to show weakness. But now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. "I don't want to be alone anymore," Kara admitted, her voice soft but firm. "I don't want to live in this space between what I've been and what I'm supposed to be. I want to know who I am now." Eric stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Then let's find out together." Kara's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met. She felt her heart race, her pulse quickening in a way she couldn't control. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, or what this marriage would mean in the long run. But for now, she was ready to take that first step. She was ready to let someone in.